Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Public Podcast. I'm your host, Anne Berry, here to break down what is going on in the world of social media. We know that Meta has just released its new app entitled Threads, which plans to rival social media giant Twitter. Here to break it down for us is Mark Mahaney, Senior Managing Director at Evercore ISI, Research Division, a very long time internet analyst. Mark, thank you so much for joining. Let's dig right on in, sir.
All right, let's do it, Ann.
So, Mark, let's start with the numbers. Threads has now got over 100 million users signing up for the platform since its launch. We're about a week in at this point. What is this, Mark? Is this the new Clubhouse or is this the new Instagram?
Well, so far it looks like the new Instagram. Clubhouse, I think, got to 10 million users. I think that's where it peaked. Maybe got a little bit north of that, but this is dramatically more than that. And then another example that's been thrown my way is, what was the Google social media network, Google Plus or something like that? That ramped up very quickly to tens of millions of users, but then essentially ended up flaming out. So this is somewhere in between. Look, 100 million is a really impressive number. We all know that. ChatGPT got to 100 million, but I think that was 2 months or something like that. So it's really impressive, and it says two or three things. One is how easy it is for Instagram to get its existing base of users, which are well over a billion, daily users, to get them to try something else. Secondly, is one of the issues with Twitter has always been, how do I find my community? How do I know who to follow? And what Instagram does is make it easy. All your friends you have on Instagram, they'll go with you. You can, or at least you can invite them all, and they can invite you too. So that makes it super easy. And the third is just the sign up process. The getting going was super simple, was super intuitive for most people. The real question is, how deep is that engagement going to be in the future? So you got 100 million, but do you really have 100 million engaged users? That's TBD.
Let's talk about some of these product features, Mark, and really dig into what has given Threads this hugely accelerated start. I mean, I remember I went onto Threads over the last week. It was an incredibly seamless onboarding process. To your point, it literally ported my community over from Instagram into this new app. The full getting on there was pretty simple. We've seen this copycat strategy, and I say that in inverted commas, from Meta and from Mark Zuckerberg before. We saw Snapchat getting cloned by rolling out Instagram stories. We saw TikTok imitated with the launch of Reels. And Meta was pretty smart about incentivizing creators to push out Reels, right? I hope I'm not making this up, but I do remember Instagram at least going through for a phase where their algorithm would proactively push out Reels a lot more aggressively in an attempt to try and drive adoption of that particular product feature. Do you think there is going to be product features emphasized or pushed by Meta to try and continue to accelerate the adoption of Threads? How aggressive do you think Zuckerberg is going to be here?
Well, and you're right. You could also argue that, this is the fourth copycat, cat copying, whatever the expression is, that Meta's done, including maybe the original Facebook. I think they made a movie about that. It is interesting, and do you want to ding them for maybe not being so innovative? Maybe, but nobody has a monopoly on an idea, and come down to execution. I hope that there's a lot more features that are improved. The day that, for example, the news came out, it was just yesterday that the CFO, 2 days ago, that the CFO of Uber was stepping down. I immediately went to Twitter and typed in the CFO's name, and I found all the news stories. And just for fun, I immediately went to Threads, typed in the CFO's name, and there weren't, I couldn't search. I couldn't find if anybody was commenting on that. And that kind of real news, real-time news application, let's talk about it. I want to find out about it, educate myself. That still needs to really be built at Threads. So there's a great communication. There's a great way to talk about things, current events with my friends, but to do really good searches, and then to be able to put commentary out there that has staying power, hashtag the thing, so somebody else can find it that may be interested in what I wrote last week. So there's an enormous number of improvements that still need to be put in, I think. So it's almost interesting to me. You got 100 million people with an app that's sort of, a quarterly, half-baked, quarterly baked.
Well, Mark, it's interesting because the idea that perhaps Threads is being built on the fly we have seen other apps and other digital platforms build in that way and then really trying to adopt and morph and pivot based on what kind of consumer feedback is coming through real time. But let's talk about something that you just said, there's no monopoly necessarily on innovation. Let's talk about second mover advantage, specifically with respect to the following. Before Elon Musk took Twitter private, even there were concerns on the street that Twitter wasn't able to get the ad revenue in that had been hoped compared to some of the other social media platforms. Now that Twitter has gone private and is owned by Elon Musk, we have seen brands for other reasons, more reputational concerns around moderation, for example, pulling out of advertising on the Twitter platform. What do you think Threads is going to do to either do a better job of the Twitter as it was as a public company, or to frankly aggressively continue to take advantage of perhaps a weak point in Twitter's life cycle right now on the ad revenue front?
Those are great questions, Ed. I'm not sure is the honest answer. I would think that the right strategy would be, let's keep ads off of Threads for as long as you can. There's no rush.
Interesting.
I mean, there's plenty of ad revenue that Meta has, and even I came up with some forecasts of about $8 billion in ad revenue by 2025. Sounds like a big number, but guess what? That'd be 5% of Meta's ad revenue that year, so they don't really need it. So in that case, don't monetize the thing. Last thing you want to do is throw off users. I completely agree with Zuckerberg on this. Let's build it to the pathway to get to 1 billion and then start layering in ads, but make sure they're relevant to users. Don't make them annoying. And that's where they have this huge advantage, because there's been two layers of under innovation at Twitter, both on the user side, I would argue, and then on the advertiser side. Absolutely. And so Meta is exceptionally good at this, helping marketers, and they've got 10 million of them. So they've had some experience here, helping them find their right audiences, getting them the right message at the right time, and then tracking the conversion. And they can do that so much better than Twitter. They can monetize ad space, user space at 2 to 3x because they're just better at it. So I just think that that's kind of gimme money. But before you get to that, get the user experience right. So there's no need to rush. Don't ruin them. And by the way, you'll create this huge, even greater advantage, because people on Twitter every once in a while put up with ads they aren't quite relevant. And if Threads can avoid that problem, super for Threads.
I think it was your report, right? It was you who said, Mark, just to put some more numbers around this, that Twitter, at least historical, previously publicly available data, was showing about $20 per user in ad revenue compared to about $60 within the Meta ecosystem. What is it that Meta is executing on better to get that spread of 3 times relative to Twitter when it comes just to ad revenue efficacy per user?
Well, I'll just throw out a couple of ideas. First, let's all remember these are auction markets, so Twitter doesn't set prices, and Meta doesn't set prices. Advertisers set prices. Advertisers decide how valuable that inventory is, how valuable it is to put an ad in front of you at a particular time when you're searching on particular topics. So then that depends on how well they think they can really target, their audiences, who they actually want to sell to. So to me, it's almost like what I think that number means, the fact that those are real numbers that you mentioned right before it got acquired. The difference was 3x in terms of the ad revenue per user. It told you that advertisers value the impressions and the ability to market to people on Meta at 2 to 3 times the rate at which they can advertise on Twitter. Twitter's always been in kind of that experimental ad block, along with Snapchat, by the way, and along with Pinterest and a couple of other names. And that's always been that core buy, because you can find your audiences. They'll even help you with the creative a little bit. And they're going to do more and more of that with AI, and then they can help you track the effectiveness of your ads. Twitter can't do anywhere close to what Meta has done in the past. That's the difference.
Mark, you really led this conversation with an anecdote that highlights what Twitter's superpower has been in terms of differentiating itself in the social media landscape, and that has been news being a real sort of go-to destination for people to find breaking news. We're coming up on election season, going full pelt, and if we look back in recent history, never has there been a moment or a window which has shown the stretch on the ideas of community and community standards, and when political dialogue has come into these platforms. Mark Zuckerberg replied to Mark Cuban, I'm just looking to read this at the moment, on a Threads post recently, where Zuckerberg said, keeping the platform, quote, friendly as it expands will, quote, ultimately be the key to its success, and says that one reason Twitter never succeeded as much as it should have was not retaining that friendliness as it grew. What's your perspective on that? Is that sort of happy talk coming from Meta that's not been without its own reputational issues, or do you think there's real merit to that statement?
I love your use of the phrase "happy talk." It's got a lot of good. That's the right expression for what
And
you
it's
just.
not a leading question,
No, no,
of course.
you said the right thing. So I guess the question is there happy talk and angry talk? Well, I guess there is, and I think there's a good
Yeah.
number of people who left Twitter because they felt like it was a bit of a cesspool, and I don't mean that. I'm not making a political statement. I just think that there was a lot of uncivil commentary on Twitter, and it turned people off. Now, I don't think that that's powered 100 million people to Threads. I'm sure it's powered some, I don't know what the number is, 10 million, 20 million. There's some number of people to Threads, and it could power more of them on there. If you can keep the conversation civil, yes. Now, Adam Mosseri, the person who's running Instagram, talked about trying to keep politics off of it. I don't think you can really keep politics. People like to talk about politics. And you know what the best data point for that is? The number two follower, the number two most followed person on Twitter. Number one is Elon Musk. He's not going to Threads. Number two, former President Barack Obama. So clearly
Oh,
people are
interesting.
interested in politics. Now, number three is Justin Bieber. Number four is Shakira. Number five is some football guy I've never heard of before. But anyway, they're it's mostly, there's a lot of, you can run a large, I don't want to say Twitter, like you can run a Threads business, Threads a platform without politics, but people enjoy some of the politics, and there should be a way to do this in a way that's civil.
Let's talk, Mark, about something that you have through your research lens looked at the past, and that's surveying to see how people split their time amongst the different social media platforms. What's your gut on whether Threads is going to cannibalize eyeball time from Instagram and whether Meta is going to see a dip in usage across its own platform?
We've seen over the last 2 years, and we've seen an increase in engagement on both Facebook and on Instagram. It's
Oh,
one of those things
interesting.
where we can see it in the data. People are spending more. There's more time spent on Instagram and Facebook per user than there was a year ago and 2 years ago. Getting at the why is harder. I think the rollout of Reels is a very good explanation, Occam's razor explanation for why you've seen this rise in engagement on both of those platforms. And I guess my basic point was, I'm sure there'll be some cannibalization. I mean, Reels, I'm sure, cost some cannibalization. People spend more time watching videos than in their stories or in their newsfeed. And I'm sure that Threads at some level leads some cannibalization. But I think we should all be open to the idea that it's probably going to lead to more incremental behavior than cannibalization, i.e., it's going to lead to more incremental
Mm.
behavior. You're just giving people another use case. That's, if you can find another reason, whether it's, video or it's marketplace on Facebook or within Instagram, some other use case. Well, we got one, a public communications platform, kind of like Twitter. If you're going to do that, you're going to create extra usage. And so my guess is when we look at this data a year or two from now, we're going to have seen rising engagement on Instagram, all in, including Threads in there because of Threads.
Mark, this question's a little bit out of left field, but when we think about the demographics, so whether it's by age or by other marker that tends to use Twitter, how similar is that user to the demographic that tends to use Instagram? And the reason I ask that question is to try to really unpack a little bit whether the adoption speed is going to be impacted by how similar or not these different audiences might be.
That's a damn good question. I would think that my basic assumption would be that the audiences are somewhat different. Instagram does skew younger. Instagram is more TikTokish. Facebook and
Interesting.
Twitter, you think, have the more
Interesting.
the greater overlap. And then you'd almost wonder, it's Threads by Instagram. I think that's the tagline. Why
Right.
are we not doing Threads by Facebook? These are very different experiences. Just as an average user, I use them very differently, Facebook and Threads. But, having said that, the one advantage, again, that Meta has is this thing called Instagram has 1.5 billion daily average
Yeah,
users.
huge
And
number.
so, that I'm sure there's a demographic difference between the two. I think the total number of users on Twitter, I think that last disclosed it was like 230 million daily average users. That probably means about 500 million monthly average users, And so, yeah, you've got with Instagram something that's 3 times the size. And so I'm sure there's a lot of demographic overlap. But the basic answer is there is a demographic difference, but the demo is so damn large on Instagram that it must include a lot of the Twitter users.
Still some space there for a bit of a land grab. Let's switch gears a little bit, Mark, to talk about regulation. You can't talk about social media without talking about the regulatory environment that we're in. Meta has been in the crosshairs or the spotlight of US regulators and European regulators in recent years. Is at least to the outside world, it may not have been true within Meta, but to the outside observer, it looks like Meta moved pretty quickly to launch something. You've made the point, it looks like it's still being built post-launch, that is clearly designed to go head-to-head with a key competitor. Do you think the ability to do that, again, in a perceived speedy fashion is going to just get the regulators even more focused on Meta's ability to continue to take share in aggressive ways?
I guess we're going to find out. You just reminded me. So we've just gone through a couple of major setbacks for regulators. Yesterday, Microsoft getting Activision through. I don't think this is an accurate statement, but it's close to being true. One of the very few deals that has been effectively blocked by regulators involved Facebook buying Giphy, trying to buy Giphy, and then not being able to buy it. With Threads, the beauty is they didn't buy anybody to build Threads; they just built it organically. So that'll keep the monopolistic elements of regulation kind of away from Facebook. And it's the simple fact that TikTok over the years has grown so big on its own. Like, there's clear evidence in the market that it's a competitive market. The social health side of regulation, along with the privacy side of regulation, those are still going to be constant issues for social media companies. And I just think that they're very hard to get political consensus around how to handle those issues. And, hopefully there's been enough public pressure and regulatory pressure that Facebook, I think, is kind of tacked and trimmed, its sales in a way and improved its practices in a way to try to deal with some of those issues. So there's going to be ongoing regulatory risk. I'm just struck by all the major tech companies now. I'd argue that if we'd had this conversation 18 months ago, Meta would have been regulator enemy number one. Today, I think regulator enemy number one isn't Meta, it's Google.
Interesting.
And in a way, that's helpful for Meta and for Meta shareholders.
Interesting. Last question for you, Mark, and that's coming back to this idea of monetization. And it's really a question about Twitter as opposed to Threads. Twitter's hired a new CEO who comes from the world of television out of NBC Universal. And if you look at the cap structure of Twitter, there's a lot of debt on that business. It has to get its cash flow up, which means it has got to get its ad revenue up if the subscription numbers haven't been able to generate the kinds of revenue that I think Elon perhaps was hoping for. Does Twitter do what Meta has done and go the way of Instagram? Are we going to see a Twitter video product to try and capitalize on the skill set of the new CEO and to try and get that revenue base up?
That makes a lot of sense. I know your private equity background. These debt loads are serious, and they're going to have to service them. And I think I thought there was a really interesting tell when Elon Musk brought into the company as in the CEO somebody with an advertising background. This is the same owner that is Elon Musk, who was really trying to find a Twitter model that wasn't based on advertising.
That's a good point.
I guess we're going to advertising. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with advertising. It's a good, healthy business. There's plenty of media models. Most media models are based on that. And I'm sure there's a place for subscription models. All the survey work we've done on Twitter in the past, though, it always showed a very small percentage of people really willing to pay for access to Twitter, even however many bells and whistles you want to give them. So I think, so your idea that they're going to do something like this, I think actually makes a ton of sense. This is exactly what, this is the kind of content that people want, and Twitter needs to, and it's been trying to do this for a while, but this kind of accelerates the pressure on them to get more video content. They don't want to get out-threaded. Maybe that's the right answer, and I think you're going to see that.
Mark Mahaney, we've got so much to look out for coming out of Threads. We've got its product development, which seems to be happening real time. We've got the regulatory spotlight. We've got what Twitter is going to do next. Please come back, talk to us, update us along the way. Folks, that is Mark Mahaney, Senior Managing Director at Evercore ISI Research Division. And Mark is also the author of Nothing But Net, 10 Timeless Stock Picking Lessons from one of Wall Street's top tech analysts. We at Public are doing book giveaways. So if you want to get your hands on a copy of the book, just send a DM to the Public Live handle and we will get one your way. Mark, again, thanks so much. That's it, folks, for Public Live.
Ann.
Join us again soon.